How many people here have experienced riding a roller coaster? Riding a roller coaster. What's the best part? The drop. Drop's the best part. Going up, though, it's all trepidation and fear, and you're holding on. But when you go down on the downslope, everything you're trusting in the person who's in charge of that roller coaster. And whether you continue down or flip over or go around sideways, whatever it is, it's a peak of emotions from terror to joy, and it keeps on going on as long as the ride keeps going on. Well, these next 2 weeks, of Lent are just like that. If we think about it, last week, when we celebrated Laetare Sunday, which means rejoice, we paused as a people, as a church, to think ahead to the Easter festivals. That's why there were flowers in the sanctuary. And we adorned the sacred image of Blessed Mother with a bouquet of flowers, as well as the saints in the foyer. It's purposely done because it's supposed to convey the sense of the beatific vision of being in the glory of God. And yet today, you come in, there's no flowers. The statues and the sacred images are all covered. And the purpose is to understand that this is a time of due diligence whereby we as a people, individually and collectively, think of participating in the Passion of Christ. This 2-week period, starting with the 5th Sunday of Lent, was known traditionally as Passiontide, whereby during Passiontide, we acknowledged the likes of reflecting on the 7 last words of Christ, or the sorrows of the Blessed Mother. It gave us the chance to think about what it would have been like to be Jesus undergoing suffering, yet knowing he's following God's will. And the Blessed Mother, who, from the moment presented Jesus to the temple guards, heard Simeon tell her that her heart would be pierced with a sword. For the sorrow she will witness, even knowing that he is the Son of God, yet the human dimension is one of carrying passion. The human element is there. We hear how Jesus, when he approaches the tomb of Lazarus, is perturbed by the people who, they don't think he can do what he can do. They do not yet realize he is God, even though he, before them, has turned water into wine in Cana, has fed the 5,000, has healed the paralytic, healed the blind man born from birth, and yet they still don't believe that he is God. So Jesus chooses this moment. Try to appreciate he knows everything. No one brought word to him that Lazarus actually died. Earlier, they brought news that he was sick. But he stayed where he was, knowing full well that he wanted to glorify God and allow the people to understand who he is. So when Martha and Mary come to him, they come out with that usual response that all of us, how could you let this happen? How do we have to have a loved one die when you could have taken care of this? Where were you when I needed you? For if you were here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus is perturbed. He's upset. because they don't see the possibility of what God can do. Finally, Jesus says, remove the stone. Now, the stone is a huge stone, bigger than me, about this wide, right? And there's a channel in front of the cave behind it. In that channel, there's a little gully whereby when the stone is pushed in, it goes in and it seals the tomb. You can't get that stone moved unless you get people, not one person, people to use pry bars to roll the stone back up off that slot. And that's the other thing that we are really not privy to in regard to this either. That the Jewish people had burial rites different than ours. They would place their loved ones in a tomb on a shelf, whereby the body for the next 3 months would slowly decay. Then, afterwards, they would collect the body, even though it was wrapped in burial cloth, so they didn't have to touch bones, kind of icky. So it's already wrapped in linen. And then they take that, all the bones, and then they put it in what is referred to as an ossuary. It's about yay wide, square, and about that high in length, depending upon the size of the person, especially the femurs. But it's that long, and it's just a small box, and it's buried vertically into the ground, an ossuary. And that's what Ezekiel's talking about in the first reading, how God promises to raise up our bodies out of the grave, not the tomb, as we hear about Lazarus, but out of the grave. And he will then, just as he did when he created Adam and Eve, will breathe life into them and allow them to be part of their true home, the promised land known as heaven. That spirit that breathes life into us is what makes us who we are and children of God. In the story of Lazarus, Jesus, again disturbed, weeps because he too is human and divine, weeps knowing the frustration of the people. He's sensitive to their awareness. He hears them. He knows everything. He knows what they're thinking. So finally he says, roll back the stone. And because it's 4 days, the body's decomposing as they speak, and knowing that there would be a stench, they said, yeah, not to do it. He goes, roll back the stone. And they, not one person, they rolled it back. And then he called forth, Lazarus, come out. And he comes out, bound in the burial cloths. No, he's not a mummy. There is a body there. And he says, untie him. And the people are astounded. For one of the things that's happening is the dead can hear. I mean, that's just amazing when you think about it. It's to let us know as well that we too will be called from our graves, as promised. That the Word of God is more powerful than the effects of sin and evil in our world. It's more powerful than death. So you have this, roller coaster ride that Martha, Mary, and the people are going through, and Jesus is remaining consistent. He is who he is. When he sees their frustration and says, well, I know he'll be raised on the resurrection in the last day, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. I am is the name of Yahweh. It was something no one would say, yet he's using it directly before them. Everybody hears what he's saying, but they still don't believe that he is God. But once Lazarus comes out, walking, he who was dead, now alive, they have to face the reality that Jesus isn't just merely human, he's human and divine. If you believe in me, you will never die. It's exactly what he says. Jesus is asking for them to believe in who his identity is, that he is God. I was at the Eucharistic Congress yesterday, and within that, they had several speakers talking about the Eucharist and being the center of our faith and all the above, but not exactly, but implicitly, the suggestion was, do we really believe that that Eucharist is God? Do we really believe that we're partaking in the bread of angels? That this is something that was gifted to us by Jesus so that we might know that he will be with us until the end of time. And no matter what situation takes on that we have to face, we do not have to worry. Just as he assured his disciples that he was going back to Jerusalem, and they're going, oh, wait a minute. You almost got stoned there. You can't go back. And he says, I am the light of the world. You do not have to worry. You'll be able to see. You won't stumble. Do not be afraid. So Didymus says, well, let us go and die with him. He's talking about Jesus, because he was sure that if they go back, they're gone. But nothing happens then, except the illusion that someone would notify the head priests. And then the head priest would plot to have Jesus killed. Why? Because he raised Lazarus from the dead, and now the people are starting to believe. We need to appreciate who we are. We need to acknowledge that not everything we see is reality, that reality is of God and from God. And even in our limitations, to understand the breadth and width of God, we take the time during these 2 weeks to reflect upon what he has done for us, how he's taken on our sin, our suffering, our pain. He's taken on our worst nightmares, and he rises triumphantly. Next week, we will recall and participate in his passion. When we do so, we enter into that which is he and his suffering. The purpose is that if we're willing to suffer and die with Christ, we will certainly rise with Christ to newness of life, just as he promised. So we take the time to also, like Christ, Pray for the forgiveness of sins of others. To pray for healing within our world, within our relationships, within our families. We take the time not so much to ask for the help from the saints, but understanding our role, not theirs. If we can only appreciate how important we are and how God has entrusted with us with His Spirit to bring a sense and knowledge and truth to others, that our God so loves us, even in the midst of our own sinfulness, He's willing to die for us so that we might have life with Him, eternal in heaven. Seize the opportunity within these 2 weeks. Take the time to reflect. Try to appreciate God has chosen you to be part of something great. And in that willingness to do His will, you most certainly will celebrate more fully the glory of the resurrection and the ascension into heaven. Oh, and by the way, on Easter Saturday night at the Easter Vigil, the images of the icons and the statues will be revealed once again and adored with flowers, for the glorification of the saints is something we celebrate come Easter, with the mindset that one day, too, we will share that eternal joy. Allow these 2 weeks to be important for you and your family, and may you celebrate Easter with great joy and great happiness.